How great is Lauri Markkanen? How great can he be? And how loved will he be by Jazz fans? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and as always, I'm excited to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. You guys know me by now, but I'm a lifelong Jazz fan, credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combines, Jazz broadcast assistant the past 3 seasons, and soon to be a 4th season, as well as a statistician for the Jazz. Lover of all things hoops, so don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual with David Locke to be gone, but I'll bring a unique perspective that you guys aren't as familiar with, but hopefully you guys enjoy. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, how much do you love Lauri Markkanen? Is he your top 5 Jazz players ever, or what parameter is he in? Top 5, top 10, number 1? Let me know. And how much do you think you'll love him if the Jazz get to the promised land? Today's sponsor is FanDuel. So now through September 22nd, this is an awesome deal. All FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Highly recommend it. NFL season started, and that means basketball's around the corner for those of you listening to this. I know that's what you guys want to hear. So in today's episode, I'll discuss how good is Lauri currently, and how does that continue to evolve as the Jazz improve around him, as the Jazz hopefully will do in this year and in the coming years. In segment 2, I'll discuss how many points per game Lauri can score on a championship level team, and how good of a player does that make him, and compare him to guys in recent history. And in the third segment, I'll give my 2 cents on a thought I heard about just how loved Lauri is for saying he loves Utah and sticking to it, and how loved could he become after this contract. So let's dive right in. Lauri is paid like a star and is an all-star caliber player, meaning he's basically top 20 to 30. I think that's fair. Now you can argue who's where. Is someone that wasn't an all-star better than him? Who cares? He's somewhere in that general vicinity, and I think it's pretty fair to say. I think you can make an argument that he's more coveted than that label. Maybe he's top 20 in most coveted players. Maybe he's top 15 even because of what he does. However, let me rephrase this. He's basically a top 30 player, but he is more coveted. Not just you could argue. Today's NBA covets what Lauri brings for role players, and so it absolutely craves it. It needs it. It's desperate for what Lauri provides as an all-star. What he does as an all-star, as a low-volume player who can score efficiently at 7 feet tall, is absolutely craved by general managers and teams, players, coaches, everything. They love it for role players. You hear so much about the 3-and-D and how amazing it is to have a plus-size wing who can shoot the ball. Well, Lauri Markkanen is more than just a plus-size wing who can shoot the ball. He's far more than that, and his production says so. But I tell you guys about how amazing I think Trey Murphy is. The number 1 pick in this year's NBA draft was Zachary Rissache because he kind of resembles a guy like Michael Porter Jr. who can shoot the ball and put the ball on the floor just a little bit. And Michael Porter Jr. coming out of high school and going into college before his back injury was far better than Rissache. That was the number 1 pick. And it's because you see 3-and-D potential. I don't actually agree with that pick. You guys know that. But the point was he was the number 1 pick. Lauri Markkanen's an all-star, has been an all-star, not just could be, has been an all-star, and is more coveted than that because he brings everything you want from a role player into a star player's role on a team. Plays a starring role on a team and has the things you covet about a player who would not do that, as well as the things that you cannot teach. 7-foot height, nearly 40% from 3, nearly 90% from the free throw line. It's unbelievable. So that's what the NBA covets, but let's just go to the numbers here. Lauri averaged 23 points per game, 23.2 if you want to be specific, which puts him with the likes of Jaylen Brown, who averaged 23 exactly, Zion, Paolo Banchero, Paul George, Cade Cunningham, Kawhi, DeRozan. Those are the guys that are near him, both positively. Some a few points ahead of Lowry, a few of those guys below. That's high praise. Those guys are excellent. Jaylen Brown just won the Finals MVP. Zion was considered the best recruit since LeBron when he came out. Banchero was the number one pick, and he's been in the playoffs. Like, that's what you covet for a number one pick. Paul George was third in the MVP voting a few years ago. Cade Cunningham, number one pick. Kawhi, two-time Finals MVP. DeRozan, one of the most productive scorers of the last decade. High praise. I'd argue currently as the man on a team, meaning the alpha, the top scorer on a team, Lowry would be the least adept in terms of his team as opposed to all these other guys, probably wouldn't be as good. The Jazz weren't as good, and he was the top scorer. And it's not fair necessarily because, yeah, you could put Jaylen Brown and take off Tatum, and they'd be worse, but that team's way better. I understand that's not a perfectly fair comparison. But Lowry may not be the most adept at leading a team, but Lowry would, I think, due to his age, size for his position, shooting, and just temperament in general, like he's very calm. He knows how to play with the team. May have the most appeal outside of maybe Paolo Banchero because he could be your future superstar, and maybe Jaylen Brown because he was just a Finals MVP, and that's hard to argue with of all those guys. So let me reiterate that: Jaylen Brown, Zion Williamson, Paolo Banchero, Paul George, Cade Cunningham, Kawhi Leonard, and DeRozan. Right now, I think Lowry is either the second or third most coveted player on a championship level team because the other guys can't lead a championship team. That's how good of a player Lauri Markkanen is, and the Utah Jazz have him. So that leads me to my next point of delineation. Being as good as the man only works for such a select few. I think it behooves the Jazz that the Lowry is better as a complementary player, and his market for a complementary player was perfectly insane. The Jazz had the Warriors trying anything to get Steph, a guy like Lowry. You can pry open their closing, and in my opinion, closed window for championship contention in Golden State. The Kings wanted Lowry desperately to bring out the best in Fox and Sabonis, and Fox, I think, has the makings of a player who can be a guy, but isn't among the select few who can achieve that. Those guys are LeBron, KD, Steph, Ant, Luka, Jokic, Giannis, maybe a few others. And maybe even some of these guys, I'd still beg the question, have they proven that they can truly win and be the man? And not sure. Yeah, I don't know that answer with Luka as good as I think he is. I don't know that about Shea. So Lowry's complementary skill set propitiates him into a higher tier than where his points per game slots him. He's about 20th in the NBA in points per game. He's about 15th, 12th most coveted player in the NBA for a team that already has a really good player. Like, there are guys that you'd rather have that are the man on another team than Lowry. That's true. I mean, there are better players on their teams than Lauri Markkanen is. But his complementary skill set puts him into a upper echelon of the NBA that the Jazz have rarely had a player of that standard. Because Lowry as a number two is better than Donovan as a number one. Lowry as a number two is better than Darren Williams was as a number one. And you could argue Gobert was better because statistics, but Donovan was the number one scorer on that team. And you needed one more player. Lowry, I don't think, is going to be the number one scorer on a championship level team for the Jazz, but that's where the Jazz need to get to the future. And right now, as a number one player, the Jazz aren't going to be a championship team, but maybe he can get better and they can contend for playoffs with him as a number one. I don't know if he'd be as good as a number one as Donovan or Darren were. We'll see. So I think Lowry is far better than where his points per game slots him, even though that's not necessarily the role he puts himself in. I think Lowry is seen as more valuable right now than Kawhi, Pascal Siakam, Karl-Anthony Towns, DeRozan, probably even more so than Zion, because what Lowry does incredibly, he does consistently and fits any team, good or bad. He brings it. And this next thought should be common knowledge, but isn't. So I'm just going to say it bluntly and clearly. Lowry is a freak athlete. Like, he doesn't give you the Ja Morant spectacular, but he may not draw that thought because he's tall and shoots it. That's what he's known for. But he's a ferocious rim attacker. He's 7 feet tall, moves unbelievably. He's strong as an ox, jumps super high, is a very good defender, can slide his feet and defend the rim, rebounds well, runs superbly, shoots on the move, does not command the ball, and has first percentile size for his position. Or I guess 99th percentile size for his position. That's a freak athlete. That's an elite asset. May not necessarily be the guy to win you a championship because it's that hard, but how good can he be? We'll discuss that next. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So you can look on FanDuel for the number of wins the Jazz get this season and take a look at the odds in each game the Jazz play this season if you're so inclined. And I recommend it. That's all there, but so is this. We'll have a little something different here for you now through September 22nd. So jump on it fast. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season game Sunday afternoons, even the out of market games. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit fanduel.com and download America's #1 sports book. I also want to tell you about Murdoch Chevy. Murdoch Chevy is amazing. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Chevy is as American as it gets. You watch an old movie and you see a truck going down the dirt road, that's a Chevy. You see a fancy new one in these commercials that you're like, wow, that truck is sleek. That's also going to be a Chevy. It's got all the range. They're located in Woods Cross and in Logan, and they have a great lineup of Chevy trucks, the Colorado and the Silverado. You can also go to the website and see the latest deals and what's in stock. That's super important. You got to see what cars are in both Woods Cross's location and in Logan's location. You can see it all on the websites. They're up to date and really nice to see what's in inventory. The amazing lineup of SUVs is also on that website, and you can see it in all of these places with the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, and the Trax. So make sure to take a visit out to Woods Cross or in Logan and tell them you listen to Locked On Jazz and visit Murdoch Chevy. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I couldn't recommend learning more about the NBA from those guys. Awesome show. So, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I talked a little bit about Lauri and his value and what's coveted in the NBA to contend. So, now let's talk about how good Lauri can be on a title team. Like, what does it look like statistically? I think Lauri can stay at the same level production-wise and be a number 2 on the right team. And the question will be, how good is the one for how well they can compete? That's pretty logical. For instance, you could have a guy as good as Luka, and before they had Kyrie, the Mavericks were pretty capped out. Instead, they made the NBA Finals. They weren't all that competitive with the Boston Celtics because their team wasn't as good. But you add a number 2 like Kyrie Irving, who I don't think is good enough to be a number 1, to a guy like Luka Doncic, who I do think is good to be a 1. And all of a sudden, you go from first round and second round occasionally to making the NBA Finals. That's quite a jump. Now, Lauri, I don't think is as good as Kyrie Irving. So you got to have a better number 1 than Luka. Hard to do. Or you have a better supporting cast, because I don't think Tatum or Brown are close to as good as Luka Doncic. All right. So let's say for Jazz fans, everyone's interested. This year is supposed to be a bad year. We've said that about Wembanyama's year. Didn't happen. But let's say it's Cooper Flag. Well, I think then Lauri would need to be amazing on offense, because Flag, to me, isn't the world's best scorer at his top-end outcome. He elevates your floor tremendously because he's going to score probably 20 points a game when he's in his prime, maybe up to 25 if he really gets the offensive game cooking. But he's excellent defensively in the same way that Chet Holmgren immediately impacts the game on both sides. Flag can do more of it because he'll have the ball more frequently. Defensively, he can guard wings and bigs and switch and all those different things. So what about Lauri? I think Lauri would need to be a 24 to 25 point per game scorer in the regular season, but be capable of stepping up further in a big moment. For reference, the finals MVP, I mentioned this earlier, was Jaylen Brown, who scored 23 per game in the regular season next to Jason Tatum's 27. But I don't think either of those two are the best 1 or 2 in the world, but it's the depth of their starting lineup. Like, that has to be mentioned. Drew Holiday, Olympic starter. Derek White on the Team USA. No, he's not the 12th best player in the world, but you need those type of players to elevate the play of your other team. They also had Kristaps Porzingis, Granted, he was injured for part of the playoffs, but Porzingis added an element they desperately craved that they lacked with Marcus Smart. And then they got Drew Holiday, who's better than Marcus Smart. I digress a little bit, but here's a point that strengthens that. You need the depth of the lineup. Devin Booker was the second best player on his team, was sixth in the NBA in scoring, second on his team behind Kevin Durant, didn't win a single playoff game. So the second player scoring 27 a game that was sixth in the NBA, and the other guy being fifth, Kevin Durant, who's the most talented scorer ever, in my opinion. They didn't have a chance. They got swept by the Timberwolves. So if you don't, it doesn't mean greatness isn't greatness from those guys. Those guys are awesome, but the team is lacking. You're not going to compete. The Celtics had great 5 players. That means the Jazz need to have those players for Lowry's stats to mean anything. Let's look back a touch more. Jamal Murray has never been an all-star somehow, but dominated for the Nuggets in their postseason run a season ago, scoring 26.1 points per game to complement Jokic when the Nuggets cruised to a title. They weren't even challenged by the Heat in the championship. They didn't have a problem throughout the entire postseason. Yeah, Jokic is wonderful. Most people say he's the best player in the NBA right now. I think that's fair. But Jamal Murray was absolutely necessary to that cause. He was sensational. And we saw it firsthand. Jazz fans, it haunts me. We saw him score 50 points and then do it again and again on the Jazz. You need that type of elevation from your number 2 player to win yourself a championship, no matter how good the number 1 is. Chris Middleton averaged 23.6 points per game, 7.6 rebounds, 5.1 assists in 23 games in the 2021 playoffs alongside Giannis. Giannis at that point, I think, was the best player in the world. And he needed all of that from Middleton to pass the Phoenix Suns, along with the Nets. Siakam averaged 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists in 6 games in the NBA Finals to beat the Warriors, next to Kawhi Leonard, who people had the discussion, is Kawhi the best player now? The point is, you need help. The Jazz need to drastically change their roster as these teams had more than just stars plus the second options I'm highlighting. But I do believe Lowry could score 24 points per game in a season and be north of 20 a game in the finals right now. And I think, and that's this current day. I think at this current juncture, September 9th, and if you put this a year forward and we're in June of 2025, that I think Lauri Markkanen doesn't need to make a single improvement, and he's got the capacity to score 20 plus in the NBA Finals next to the right number 1 if the Jazz had the right team to battle and make it to the NBA Finals. I have no doubt about that. Lowry's excellent. He shoots nearly 50, 40, 90 at 7 feet tall on a diet of shots that now he's focused on by the defenses. Like, the defenses look at him and they say, well, that's their number 1 option. Let's take away these pin down screens and make him catch it on a flare, and he shoots it, catch high, shoot high, drains it, bottoms every time. The first 2 months of his first season with the Utah Jazz, you saw him attack because he wasn't that high on scouting reports, and then it became abundantly clear, as it did to the Jazz in that training camp, that Lauri Markkanen was the best player, and it became more difficult. So what's he got to do to move his game up, and how good can he be? Well, let's talk about that type of efficiency with the ball in his hands. You're going to see more mid-range isolation. You're going to see more individual creation, the opportunity to develop his game this year, next to Cody Williams, who you hope figures into the future. See where Keontae George and Lauri Markkanen can play together. Maybe you see some pick and pop, some pick and roll. You see Lauri create, and then when he draws doubles, kick the ball out. I want to see what he can do when he's forced to make decisions on how to be the team's best player, as opposed to just so beautifully coalescing with the rest of the team. He fits in beautifully with any team. That's the value. That's why Steph Curry wants him so badly. That's why LeBron and Draymond on JJ Redick's podcast and Draymond's podcast, they talk about how great Lauri Markkanen is. They watch the sets that Will Hardy draws up, and they're like, wow, we wish we had Lauri because we could truly contend. We have the makings to contend if we had a Lauri Markkanen. Well, Lauri Markkanen doesn't have the guy to have the luxury of asking for another Lauri Markkanen. So he's right now got to improve his game. And I think he can be a guy who scores 24, 25 points a game on a championship contender in a few years. And his game will stay steady. Like, his game, though I think he's a top athlete in the NBA and doesn't get enough credit for it, he doesn't need to rely on his athleticism. He can let the game come to him. But I want to see him take the game and be aggressive, be assertive, and make defenses adjust how they guard him throughout the season, because I want to see him punish if they put a smaller player to have quickness, shoot over the top of him, play like Dirk, post him up, kick out for threes. I want to see versatility in Lauri's game as a star. And then when he has all those tricks in the bag, when the Jazz are ready to compete, then it can be brought to the forefront in a playoff series. I think he can be a MVP of a series if he gets hot. I really do. But the Jazz need the right team to surround him, but he needs to, in the meantime, work on the individual, almost be selfish because it's not in his nature. You need to force that into Lauri Markkanen. 3 or 4 face-ups a game from the mid-post. A couple, hey, I brought the ball up, I'm going to pull up and go to the rim and get fouled, or pull up and shoot a 3. That's what I want to see this year from Lauri Markkanen, and develop into the player to see how good he can become when the Jazz are ready to compete, because he carries that torch for the Jazz. Well, coming up next, we'll discuss how beloved is Lauri Markkanen for staying in Utah, and how will that level change? Can it go up? Can he propitiate himself into the all-time greats of the beloved Utah Jazz? By that, I mean John Stockton, Karl Malone, Darren Williams, Donovan Mitchell, Andre Karolinko, all these guys. Just how great is Lauri? How beloved is he for staying in Utah? And how beloved can he be if the Jazz get to a championship? We'll discuss all of that next. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, we sometimes lack that curiosity and lose it. What's something you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, or maybe how to finally beat your friend in bowling? Maybe you want to read more. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era can come at any age. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and it isn't just for those who have experienced trauma, or it can be helpful to anyone. It's not just for those who are having serious troubles. It can be helpful to feel your best and experience the lost curiosity once more and become your best self. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch therapists anytime. If you don't click, you can switch and say, you know what, this person might help me more, free of charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All righty, welcome back on to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I was asked a while ago and have thought about this, so I want to pose it to you guys. How beloved is Lauri Markkanen by Jazz fans after signing with the Jazz and living up to saying he loves Utah and staying? So it's a question because the Jazz are a small market team. We all know that. And loyalty is not something that's common in the NBA. You don't see the Tim Duncans, you don't see the Dirk Nowitzkis that often anymore. You really don't. And it's a pity. I grew up watching the NBA in that era, and I thought that was normal. But I learned it's not, and it's a hard truth to learn. So Jazz fans have had their hearts broken by Gordon Hayward saying, I love Utah. It fits great. And all of a sudden on 4th of July, he ruined my day at Stanford tennis camp. I was sitting there at the elite camp, and all of a sudden this guy said, hey, you're from Utah, right? Gordon Hayward's leaving. I said, no, it can't be true. He loves Utah. Well, it turned out to be true. He left. Years before that, Darren Williams was my favorite player. And one day I was sitting playing basketball after school, and someone told me it happened, and I cried. I couldn't believe it. I was devastated. And then makes matters worse, I'm listening to former Jazz coach Gordy Chiesa on the radio. On my mom picks me up, and I'm driving home, and I'm listening on the radio, and I hear, 1, it's true, and 2, Jerry Sloan is resigning. Horrible day. I cried in the back of the car. I've been a Jazz fan for a long time, but that's why this question matters to me. How beloved is Lauri for maintaining that he loves Utah and living up to it, saying, yeah, I'm going to sign with the Jazz if I can. There's trade rumors, and the Jazz were the ones looking at the trade rumors, which makes sense. If you can get better, you get better. It's a cutthroat business. But Lauri goes through all of that, thinks about the different places, has the option to go different routes, and goes, I'm staying with the Utah Jazz. I love it here in Utah. There's not many players that, one, are European, and the climate of Utah is the most similar to their native climate, like it is for him in Finland. But many have said they love Utah, and it hasn't been proven. Donovan Mitchell, another example. Loved Utah, came in, went to 4th of July parties with everyone, went to barbecues, love Utah, went to the state tournament, watched Dallin Hall, who's now balling for BYU and dominate. And all of a sudden he's in Cleveland. In the first year, they're talking about his defensive intensity. And he's like, oh, it's different living in Cleveland. That didn't sit well with Jazz fans. Not saying that bothers me all that much, but I'm just saying the players that the Jazz fans have loved the most, not all of them have stuck with the Jazz or have this truth to them of, oh, this authentic truth of I love Utah and living up to it. So how does Lauri Markkanen compare? I'm a diehard Jazz fan. Was born when John and Carl were retiring, getting old at least. I was born when they were getting old. And then by the time I was watching basketball, John was retired and Carl was on the Lakers. I can vaguely remember the Pistons and Lakers as a little kid. So Darren was the first to captivate me. And I still love Darren and AK-47. That's where my heart lies. They're probably my two favorites of all time. I can't change it. It's just what made me love basketball. But Darren had a complicated finish with the Jazz. He, I think, is still well liked by Jazz fans because of recent years apologizing to Jazz fans for what happened between he and the franchise's icon, Jerry Sloan. Then came Hayward, who adored Utah until I don't think Jazz fans will ever like him. Then perhaps the most captivating player, the fun guy in a Jazz uniform, like 20 years probably. I think Donovan was probably the most captivating based on his highlights. Donovan forced his way out, and by the end of the last year, I was working for the team, and you could feel something about that team was different than years past watching them. I still like Donovan, and many do not, but that's how I feel. Then there's Lauri Markkanen. I know this is long-winded. He loves Utah, signs a huge deal to stay with the Jazz, and that's his preference all along. So how much does he raise up in your guys' all-time favorite Jazz men? Some of you will love Memo. Some of you will love Ostertag, Eaton if you're a little bit older. Maybe Brian Russell. I don't know. Maybe it's Hornacek. I'll always love D-Will and AK the most. They made me love basketball and the Utah Jazz. But Lauri, I believe by the time he plays out his next contract and maybe his career, could become one of the most beloved Jazz men ever. Let me give you the pitch as to why. Because Lauri Markkanen made Utah his home voluntarily after being traded here, loved it, said this is a place he wants to be, wasn't just drafted here and said he loved it initially. That was authentic. He's here. Lauri's been an all-star, can be an all-star more times. He becomes one of the better players in Jazz history. Now, maybe because the Jazz have all these picks, all of these assets, the Jazz can actually get over the hump and contend more so than they have since before I was born. I was born in 2000. So 1997, 1998, not in my recollection. I've read a lot about it. I'm a student of the game, but the best I've seen is the Jazz with D-Will when they beat the We Believe Warriors and then got smoked by the Spurs in the conference finals. That's the best I've seen. That's the best any of you guys have seen since 1998. So can Lauri get us over the hump to contend to that level or maybe even further, win a championship, maybe go to the finals? If he does that, how high does Lauri go in your all-time favorite, most beloved Jazzman? Maybe some would say, hey, Leif, you've said Lauri would be the second best player on a championship team. So why would we love Lauri the most? Wouldn't we love Cooper Flagg or whomever? And that's fair. But Lauri signing with Utah made that possible. Lauri bringing, hey, yeah, we may be bad this year, but we have a foundational piece on our team that is so coveted, as I discussed earlier in this episode, by the wealthiest teams in the NBA, by assets in terms of current best basketball players. That guy's that coveted, yet he stayed here, and now we have the chance to grow our team through a rebuild while maintaining our best player. That's why it's possible to contend. Lauri Markkanen. Now, maybe he's not the best player on the team if the Jazz truly contend. That's what I believe. That's what many of you guys believe. But he may be the most loved for his loyalty. Loyalty means a lot to small market teams. Believe me, I know. I loved a lot of our players, and it broke my heart when they left or they were traded. You look at these teams in the NFL and you see a quarterback stay for their entire career and it makes you happy. Feel the same way about basketball. Lauri, I know he didn't start his career. I know the Jazz were his third team, but he made Utah his home voluntarily as opposed to being drafted into it, and that means something. I doubt I'd ever put him over in terms of quality of a player of Darren Williams or Donovan Mitchell, or even guys like Dantley or Griffith, who had great years with the Jazz, but their careers were not defined by being Jazzmen. But Lauri may have his career more defined by his time with the Jazz and hopefully has better playoff successes than all of those guys, two of whom are hanging in the rafters, and the other two for the past 20 years have been the most captivating players. it becomes interesting to see how much Jazz fans gravitate to Lauri's stoicism and loyalty versus the dunks and flair and the appeal that Donovan or D. Will had. But maybe the stoicism, the steadiness, the appreciation for what Utah brings, the cultural appreciation for, hey, I'm from Finland. This doesn't feel that different to me. And I like it here. And we're now beginning to wins over Jazz fans more than the short-lived flash in a pan highlights and electricity that Donovan Mitchell provided. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I'm making that pitch, and the more I've thought about it, the more reality I see in it. The more initially I was like, are you kidding me? No, he's not a top 5 player the Jazz have ever had. We've had John Stockton, Karl Malone, Darren Williams, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Mark Eaton, all these guys. And then you go to the Griffiths, the Maraviches, the Adrian Dantleys. You go to all those guys and you're like, no, there's no way. But maybe he can get there in terms of the relevance of his career in Utah. Some of those other guys, their career, it was not in Utah. Their defining moments of their career. Even Donovan and Darren will probably play more of their career for Donovan than elsewhere than in Utah. Lauri chose to be in Utah and gave it a chance. So let me know what you guys think about that. I'm starting to be swayed a little bit toward it. Time will tell, but there's a chance. Thank you again for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. And now check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where the season never ends, providing excellent national expertise with local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On NBA podcast network, your team every day. Thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz an awesome environment. I love hosting with you guys. And as always, go Jazz.